Yay. I'm just waiting for all of the little bells and the whistles to say that we are live and you can see me. Welcome back, everyone. We are on episode 11 of Witch Please, Sunshine's Guide to the Mystical. And we're keeping on with last week's topic and conversation. I asked folks, what might they want to hear about this week? And there was some commentary around, hey, yeah, I would actually love to hear about, how do we handle these relationships that you're talking about? How do we handle, when we have a relationship in our life that might not be, aligned with where we need to go? So we are talking today all about breaking energetic connections. And so I hope that this interests you. I know it's been pretty much a topic of conversation, in my group for maybe the past couple of weeks, because when the veil thins, where we're at right now in this time of the year, and you start to actually feel any of the spirits and the folks on the other side, that can mean sometimes that as you're allowing that feeling and the receptivity to come through, that you might even be slipping and allowing some of your guards down and some of your protection. And so you might be feeling some energetic connections that you wouldn't typically have felt before. So we're going to be talking to you today all about breaking energetic connections. But let's start first, of course, by making sure we're all on the same page. What do I mean by an energetic connection? And I thought about this because, I could probably go find a definition somewhere, which I often will do when I'm sharing with you guys kind of like definitions and stuff and doing this level setting to start. But I thought about it for myself. How would I define an energetic connection? And it came across as this, right? It's the moment that two souls recognize that the other exists. Now, I'm not saying that it needs to be in person. I'm not saying that it needs to be, through a handshake or anything. It's just when two souls recognize that the other exists. And often these are going to be very temporary, right? So think about walking down the block and you catch eyes with someone so that you can like step around and avoid hitting them, right? Like there is an energetic connection, but it's temporary, right? It's just for that moment and then it passes. Same thing, like, if you tend to be an individual that's a little bit more reserved, maybe a little bit more of an introvert, what you may find as you go to school or you go into a classroom or, maybe, you've got this temporary container you have to be in. You stand in line, in the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, or, here in Michigan, we call it the Secretary of State, right? You may be in that space with folks and, that energetic connection may be happening, but it's temporary, right? There's nothing really that is requiring those connections to continue to exist. And they can, right? Like, especially with that DMV example, if you are very, very sensitive and folks have connected to you, especially if they like needed that connection, like we're in desperate need, you may need to do some like, dry bathing and get that off of you. Because let's be real, connection is a huge part of humans' lives, right? It is, I would, in really simplistic places like in simplistic ways, I would say that our purpose in life is to experience life. And the way that we do that is by connecting through other human beings, right? Connection is a really huge part of being a human. And because of that, a lot of times throughout our life, connections that we have will be longstanding. They may just be for, 6 months because you're, maybe taking a class or you're in some kind of, program or certification or something of that nature. Or it could be for 6 years because you jumped into a marriage and yeah, right. I think I was married actually for 4 years, but the relationship was just about 6. Right. So there can be temporary energetic connections, but very often we have much more lengthy, intentional connections that end up happening. And, let's be real, as we're talking about this, some of these energetic connections are going to be wanted, right? These long standing, right? So think about a partner that you feel safe to be vulnerable with. That's a connection that we want. We want someone that we feel comfortable and okay crying around, somebody that we can like truly be our own little vulnerable, selves with. We want to establish, energetic connections with folks that love us and respect our boundaries. Think about the family or the friends that you have around you that truly, like, really show you what love and support look like. And like when you set a boundary or you say that you have a need, like, oh, I really need some time and space for myself right now. They're like, oh my God, go for it. Take that, sweetie. Like, yeah, you do. You need it, right? You deserve it. Like, they truly are like these beautiful, healthy, folks around you. And then, the next is, those are people that you're probably talking to, you're closer with, but like community. So maybe you have a church or a community or a group of girls or, people or a networking group, and it's truly uplifting and high vibrational, right? Like when you walk in there, you are just like, God, yes, you feel whole, you feel good, you feel uplifted, you feel warm and filled with love, right? But on the opposite end, right, law of duality, there are some energetic connections that are not going to be as wanted, right? So imagine that you have a partner that struggles with codependency and taking responsibility for their actions. That person that's constantly, you're having to pick up after them, you have to follow up behind them, you're having to double check and remind them, did you make that doctor's appointment, right? Did you schedule, have you done these things to take care of yourself? And I've been in those relationships, right? And those are really, really draining and kind of like energetically fatiguing connections. You might have friends and family members who don't respect who you are or the boundaries that you set. And I think this might happen a little bit more frequently, maybe when folks are younger, because I think as you get older, a lot of people will learn how to truly, not care what their friends or family think. But I've watched people my age, I've even watched people older still, succumb to kind of this, energetic, the word my guides are even putting in my head is threat, right? So from a younger perspective, you might have friends or family members that are like trying to tell you what you should be doing, how you should be doing things, offering you unsolicited advice. Okay. And that could be because it's coming from a place that they're not really respecting who you are, or maybe even some of the boundaries that you've set in that perspective. Right. And then the last one, some of the energetic connections that might not be wanted, is a community that is hiding low vibrational truths behind high vibrational masks. And I'm going to give you an example of something. I was born and raised Catholic. And, I have been into some Catholic churches that feel just unbelievably beautiful and warm. Right. Where that the priest is just a beautiful man of God. And they just, it is. But I have also walked into some Catholic churches where, as an adult, we've now come to realize that these priests or these folks in these, positions of power have potentially taken advantage of the community. And therefore, as this example, they've had they've hidden these low vibrational truths, right? When I was a child, I come to find out that there was one of our parish priests that was an alcoholic, right? So there's a low vibrational truth that they had hidden, and some parents found out about it, and it really created an uproar. And, behind these kind of like high vibrational masks, this very holy, pious position. And so that's a very, I think an example that a lot of people might be able to relate to, but it can also happen. I'll give you another example. There was a group of individuals that I would hang out with and, practice and performed magic with a number of years ago. And I was trying to help coordinate and organize and make sure that we were, participating in the wheel of the year, the Sabbats and the Sabbats, and, all of that kind of gathering and doing something, and just really like, being the badass witches that we were. And, which was awesome. But what I found out as I started to get into it is they were hiding some low vibrational truths. And that low vibrational truth is that they really didn't want anybody else stepping in and providing ideas and thoughts as to how things worked or happened. And so, even though they were very much so enjoying talking about, being a witch and being in these holidays and doing all of this stuff, when the time came for them to actually sit down and do it, my planning and my organization frustrated and overwhelmed them. And so there was just this really weird low vibrational truth that they kept hiding even while participating. And so it took a couple of, I think it was probably like four holidays before it came out. Right. So like, that's another example of like a community that can hide a low vibrational truth behind a high vibrational mask, right? These really amazing celebrations that I was helping to coordinate and orchestrate and put together. But yet just that organization behind it and kind of accountability created overwhelm. And so it was kind of a bummer. It was kind of a bummer to see that. But that's an energetic connection that you don't want, right? You don't want that. And some of you may be wondering, I would imagine, right? Like, because I'm giving you some pretty concrete examples, right? You can, I would imagine, relate to. But what if you have an unwanted energetic connection and you're not aware of it? It's not very clear, right? And so I thought about this. There's a couple of ways that I'm recognizing over the last couple of weeks that it can show up. And this is me, and we'll see even if my guides say anything else as I share this. One of the things is like truly unexplained fatigue, right? We all know when we're getting sick. We all know when fatigue may be hitting us for certain reasons. We've overextended ourselves, we're overstressed or anything of that nature. But if you're finding yourself like in these moments of unexplained fatigue and you're literally like, this is so weird, right? Maybe you're turning into coffee in the afternoons that you didn't normally used to. Maybe it's not coffee. Maybe you find, maybe once upon a time you kicked a sugar habit and you're actually like finding yourself like reaching for sugars and sweet things in the afternoon. That can be another way to like where fatigue shows itself, but we don't recognize it. Buzzing or fuzziness in the head. So I, while doing a scan recently, as I hit my crown chakra, it was fuzzy, like white noise on a TV. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's what it sounded like. And I could see that too. And so I knew right there that there was an energetic connection there that was disrupting things, right? I needed to actually sever that. You can have some intrusive thoughts as well. That could be an indication. And so if you find, I'm a pretty optimistic individual, silver lining, half full, all of that kind of stuff. So whenever I find myself automatically kind of like flipping to another like mindset that is just not my normal, it'll take me probably about 3 or 4 seconds before I'm like, that's not even me. Like that is not a me thought. And so that can be you in this energetic kind of wave of someone else. Undesired reminders of them. I don't know how many of you have had this happen, but I remember when I first got divorced, I was in a very bitter place around my ex-husband. And I had tried to like get memories, all sorts of ways to like avoid having these reminders of him come up. And, every single time one came up, I knew that was him. Like it was a very obvious, he was thinking of me. He was thinking of me. He was thinking of me. Right. It's just the way that the reminders would come up. It would be like little jokes that he used to poke fun on me, little things and stuff like that. So undesired reminders of them can be, say that there's still an unwanted, connection. And then dreams with them in it. Like if you are having someone that is popping into your dreams, and this is just someone, and mind you, once again, you may not originally recognize that it's an unwanted energetic connection, right? It may not be like very clear. So these are just signs. So like someone's showing up in dreams and you're like, this is strange or weird, or why am I dreaming about them? You may want to take a step back and really ask, like, is that a comfortable thing, right? there are some folks in the magical, spiritual, witchy space that do a lot of their work in the dream space. And so they'll go and have conversations. I mean, I've literally had friends tell me that they will intentionally go visit other folks, whether it's to do like healing. That's sometimes what they do, but sometimes it can be to check on them and see how they're doing and things of that nature. I have a friend that will very commonly do that, travels on the astral, right? That can be another thing, right? That can be another indication, because if you wake from that dream and it wasn't very comfortable dream, that could say that it's an unwanted connection. Now, of course, at the end of the day, why am I sharing all of this with you? Why is it important for any of you to be aware of this? Why is it important for any of you to care? And that's because it's probably easy to deduce, but you may have some unwanted connections around you, and I want you to know how to be able to handle them. Right? Couple of things. I got a couple of things here to do. The number one thing that you need to decide, though, is, do you want the connection or not? Right? So let's say you wake from a dream, you're a little bit uncomfortable, somebody showed up in that dream, and you're like, God, I haven't talked to this person in a year and a half. And, frankly, I'm just not a big fan of what they're doing in their life. I don't want to talk to them again, right? Maybe it's an ex-partner, an ex-friend, anything of that nature. And you're just like, I don't want to, right? You need to decide, because maybe you're like, I'm okay. I want to, I'm seeing changes. Maybe you want to. I say this because if you teeter or waver on this, you may find that you're letting that individual continuously reconnect to you unconsciously. Right? And the moment they do that, especially if that's an individual that had a deep connection to your heart, they can pull that energy from you, right? As we talked about in that last episode. You can just kind of pull it and keep pulling it off. Siphon it, as someone had said in a comment. So that's the first thing. You need to decide whether or not you want the connection, right? If you decide you do or you don't, doesn't really matter. My next suggestion is to stand up for yourself. Right? So you could say that you don't want the connection and you actually want to stand up for yourself. And maybe you want to tell that individual, right? If it's safe enough, maybe it's a friend. I have a friend a number of years ago. They were active in addiction. It had been about the third time since I had tried to get them clean, and they relapsed again. And I had to stand up for myself. I had to draw a really hard boundary, right? In that particular world, even though I wanted the connection, and I have no problem even with that connection now, I drew a very hard boundary to let them know that until they decided to finally get clean, right? And I knew that they were clean for at least a year, that I wouldn't have anything else to do with them, that I was done. I wasn't going to try to help anymore. Right. And so in that particular state, I stood up for myself and I set a hard boundary, but I allowed that connection to happen. Right. You could have someone else that you set a hard boundary with, and you don't want that connection to continue to exist. And you can make that very clear. Right. You can make that very, very clear if that is the case. Now, I don't know that I've had a whole ton of folks, but if you've been around for a while, you may know that I have been no contact with my parents for a while. So there's another example of a very hard boundary to set, because I've stood up for myself. And I did in my notes, I want to be very clear. This is if you are safe, right? Because if you are in an abusive situation, if you are being verbally, emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually abused in any way, shape, or form, it may not be the smartest idea to just stand up for yourself, right? You could actually be putting yourself at risk. And so I encourage, if you find yourself in those situations, please love yourself enough to start working with a therapist. Please do that, right? That therapist will be better equipped than I am to help ensure that your mental, physical safety is protected, right? You could definitely come back and work with me on any of that spiritual safety, but like from that mental and physical perspective, we don't want to get more damage mentally or physically. So if you are in an abusive relationship, rather than just standing up for yourself solely, you very well may want to work with a therapist to try to figure out how to do that. Right. I put this note down here as I was putting the notes. The more you remain confident in who you are, the less likely an unwanted connection will be able to attach to you. So when we know and understand our true identity, who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in, we leave little room for people, right, energetics, to connect, because we're still open and curious about other ways, right? So the more you're confident in who you are, the less likely an unwanted connection will be able to attach to you. I also want to state too that when we are talking about standing up for ourselves and setting boundaries, it's an interesting thing I stumbled across earlier today, right? It's not just about setting the boundary. A lot of people will tell you, like, I don't have a hard time setting a boundary. I can set boundaries. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, they have a hard time upholding them because they don't want to be uncomfortable making sure they're upheld, right? And so I'll give you a perfect example. You know how hard it is to go no contact and to have people continuing to text and to call and to say things. Why won't you respond? Why won't we respond? Because like every bit of you is trying to like kind of saying like, oh God, I should just respond. I should just tell them, right? But it's opening a door back up. So you really can't do that, right? You're just putting that connection back. So you have to be, and it was so somatically, bodily uncomfortable. My heart would race, my stomach would flip, I would get nauseous just from a text message. Right? I mean, wild. So standing up for yourself is that second one. That third one is check for unwanted connections. Double check that you don't need any other boundaries within your network. And so this is a really interesting one, because if you happen to have folks that you are still hanging out with, keeping close ties to, and they are connected with folks that you have tried to set hard boundaries with, you may find that you need to actually set a hard, and I'll give you another example with my mom, right? My mom has a habit of sharing other people's business. It's something a lot of people know about her, right? And so for me, if I didn't want to be connected with someone and I knew my mom talked to them, I wouldn't share certain information with my mom because I didn't want her sharing it with them, right? And so you may find that you need to set some harder boundaries with some of your connections, or even state things like, I don't want you talking. I don't want you, or that your involvement there means that, we will be limited in our involvement here. And these things and it's really hard because this is personal, but it's not like personal against someone. It's personal to like me or as the individual, but it's not personal as in like, oh, because your friends, like I'll give you an example. I told you about the friend that was the, active in addiction, and set the boundaries, wasn't going to, talk any of that nature to them. Well, I did have reached out to their family. Right. This is somebody that I'd been friends with for like 20 years. I hung out with their family, everything. I reached out to their family. This is a perfect example of somebody setting a boundary with me. It was about a week later that friend reached out to me and asked me not to talk to their family anymore. And that was really hard because these were people that I had become close to and I had connected to, and who knew I loved my friend very much and had cared for my friend and their children very much. And I knew that if I would have continued trying to reach out and talk, it would have created an unwanted connection right back to my friend. She would have had access to me in a way that I didn't want. The boundary that I set between her and I was that I wouldn't have anything else to do with her until she had gotten clean. And so by interacting with her family, I was kind of violating that boundary of myself a little bit, and opening that door back up. Right. And so I stopped. I stopped talking to her brother, her mom. I have every now and again reached out to her oldest just to make sure that the family's doing okay and all that kind of good stuff, but not talking about her, which is what she'd wanted. Right. So sometimes you need to check for unwanted connections. And that was one that, somebody did on me. And, I appreciate that they did it. That's what they needed. And frankly, I needed it too. Right. And my guides kind of knew that. Fourth one, up your energy protection, right? Up your energy protection. And I want to, like my guides are reminding me, we're talking about breaking energetic connections. And part of what I'm sharing in all of this is like how unconsciously we connect them. We are connecting them. And so like I go back to that whole, the first way to break a connection is to decide you don't want it, right? Second, set the boundaries. Third, make sure there's nothing else connecting you back to them. Fourth, up your energy protection to make sure that they can't hit you again. If you don't do any energy protection, start doing it. If you do it once a day, do it twice a day. Set the literal intention. It can be as easy as when you wake up in the morning, setting the intention that no energy is able to connect to me unless I have given it explicit permission. Right? I've often put Teflon bubbles around clients as well. So sometimes in the energy protection technique is to imagine a bubble around. Well, I myself have used a mirror, but I've often around clients put a Teflon bubble, and that's so that anything that is coming to them does not able to stick to them. So you could even think of something like that. The very last resort that I would recommend, even though we're all witches here, my dear friends, is to do spell work, right? And that's because I typically don't recommend turning to that level of magic until you've done all the internal magic first, all the alchemy. So if you've made the decision that you don't want to be connected, if you've already stood up for yourself and made sure that the boundaries are set, if you've double checked to make sure that there are no unwanted connection and have upped your energy protection and now think it's time to do a spell, well, you got a couple of different options, and that will greatly depend. And this is not about all of the various different options, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. You could always do a binding spell. You could bind their energy from being able to connect back to you, and you can find binding spells available, on the internet anywhere. You could just do some pure candle work, right? Nice, beautiful white, candle that you light, connect to your higher self, your holy guardian angel, and set some prayers and intentions through that candle magic to ensure that they are not able to connect to you and reconnect to you, and that you are protected and your energy is always at the highest vibration. Or you could even do what we are, and by we, there's a handful of us right now that have talked about some of the energetic connection work and are talking about breaking the mask, so to speak, right? Breaking the masks that people tend to wear to hide any type of low vibrational energy. So you could do that by literally having anything that could be broken as a representation of the mask. So maybe you get an actual mask, maybe you make a plaster mask, maybe you use a dish, maybe you use a mirror, maybe you use a vase and paint something on it, right? But you could literally do the act of breaking in that spell work. So, whew, that was a lot. I hope that this helps. I'm sure there's a ton. I'm sure the ton of other ideas. If you're listening to this on replay, you're watching this on YouTube, drop us some comments. Let us know other ways that you break energetic connections. As I said, there's a handful of things that go along with this, right? The very first one, though, is deciding you don't want that connection, right? So if you are not certain of that, if you are still teetering and wavering on that, spend some time in that position first. So, all right, my dear friends, I see Rebecca. So delighted to have you here with us today. Anybody else that's catching this, please drop us some comments, like, subscribe, all that kind of great stuff. We'll be back again next week. Who knows what the topic is? Will be. I don't usually know until you let me know, or Spirit does. So until next time, my dear friends, much love from me. It's all you. Take care.
Hey, a person